I had the honor and privilege of speaking to Gene Billingsley, one of the founders of GMT Games. Our topic of conversation: what are the games that built this great company? In part one, we'll look at the key games that were released between 1990 and 2005 here on Legendary Tactics. All right, I'd like to welcome Gene Billingsley, the founder, one of the founders of GMT Games. And today we're going to talk about the top 10 games that built GMT. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and stories. And I saw your list in advance, and what I love about it is it's not limited to just 10. You couldn't help but have
There's
bonus
so
picks.
many. Well, thank you. I'm really it's an honor to be on your program. Um, it is. I know you said I probably didn't see something you did. Rachel and I watch a lot of things that you guys do. I can't say every single one, but we feel like content creators are a really important part of how we reach out to our customer base. And in a lot of ways, what you say about a game matters more than what we say about a game because of course we're supposed to say, it's good. I mean, I hope we built a reputation over the years that you could trust what we say. That, if we say you'll like it because of this, then you really will. Or hey, you might not like this part, that you could take that to the bank and you can trust us. But even at that, content creators carry more weight, I think. So we like to see what you're saying. We like to look at your shows.
Yeah.
Um, I like the creativeness of you guys' approach. You know, you have like current stuff, like here's reviews and here's what this does, and here's an unboxing plus, and then you'll go, you know, have you ever just really wanted to play an awesome game of Twilight Struggle? Here, learn how to do this. And so I love the mix of how to play well with just kind of coverage of the various games. I think you guys do that really well.
Oh, thank you very much for saying so. We're fans, so it's easy for us. This is a passion project for us as well. So,
And I think that's kind of, I mean, I was there at the beginning of this thing we call GMT, but I was a fan in the beginning, not really just of GMT games, but of games, of war games especially. And I was a fan of victory games, and I'm still a fan. And so I think that both drives me to the kind of games that other people that are like me would enjoy, and also it drives me to like a camaraderie with the people who write things online and say things online, even the ones sometimes that say, "Hey, this really stinks." I can sometimes look at it and go, "Yeah, we could have done that better." So it's all I'm trying to say. It's a gamer's point of view. I'm still a fan of games. 35 years later, the thing that many people warned me about when I started, which was that your business could ruin your love of your hobby. And I have seen it happen. And I'll be honest, there have been a couple times when it just got so much drudgery that I almost did. And strangely enough, Mr. President almost did that because I was so into that game for so long that I hadn't played anything else because I felt guilty if I played anything else. Anyway, this, I guess this list that I put together, it is a view from, one of the creators, but it's also a view from a fan of GMT games. And I guess what I would say to start with is that no great game happens without great people. And so as I built this list, it's probably not what a lot of people would expect, like start with Twilight Struggle, which is clearly the best-selling game we've ever done.
mm,
So I want to look at the games more chronologically. And clearly we've done 500 games, so 10, we're going to miss a few, right? Uh, but I want to start in the beginning. Each game brought us something with customers, but also brought people to GMT Games. And I guess the thing that I'm proudest of over 35 years is that people that started designing games for us with us in 1991 and 92 and 95 and 99, like Ted Racer, they're still designing games for us. And I mean, as a team builder, that really it makes me happy because it tells me that we're doing something right. But it would be I would be remiss to say it was this game that built GMT. It was actually the people that made the game that built GMT. And so we're going to talk about designs, and I'm going to talk about designers. But you should know that in the background of the designers, there were developers, there were artists in the early years of a lot of these games that we're going to talk about. Um, Roger McGowan, who did the cover art for most of these games, not all, but most, and Mark Simonich, who is the best um, art director I've ever seen or known. He he has no ego, so he works with everybody well. I did see a note from one time to a designer that said, "This is your 32nd revision of this game. Your 33rd will be your last." And I was like, "Okay, we finally found out where Mark's limit is. He's patient for 32 times and then no more." But Mark and Roger behind the scenes, they helped create the package, the look, the feel, the way that these things hold together in terms of their physical systems. So, like I said, we're not really talking about them today, but I wouldn't want to put these games out there without acknowledging them because they had a part in in these games that built GMT games. So let's just start, okay? So let's start with 1990 because we did three games in 1990. They happened to be my designs, and I'm going to tell you that we got really lucky. I sat at a Charles Roberts Awards. Um, Back then, they had them in physically at. I think that one was at Origins. Maybe it was WB. I think it was Origins. And I was sitting in front of Joe Walkowski, whose game, one of his Fleet Series games, was up against Silver Bayonet for a Charles Roberts Award. And I turned to Joe and I said, "I voted for yours because I did." And then mine won, which, it was lucky. But the reason I mention it, and also Operation Shoestring won an award, is because beyond customers that we had reached out to and beyond our team, nobody really knew who we were in terms of the designers of the time. Well, not long after this happened, we had these games that were getting popular and had won awards. My phone rings, and it's Richard Berg. And I'd never met Richard Berg, but I sure knew who he was because I'd played his Terrible Sir Sword and, all those great battles of the American Civil War games. And he said, "Hey, I've got a game for you if you're interested." And I was like, yeah, kind of like agog, right? Here's a guy I've been playing his game since I was 12 years old. And so he had a Civil War game, and I said, "Hey, that's great." And he said, "There's this other game that I'm doing with Mark Herman, and I think you should take it." And I was really excited because I also hadn't met Mark Herman, at least not in the sense that we have today. I met him at Origins a long time ago. But um, I really wanted to work with Mark Herman. And he said, "Well, the topic is ancients." And I just went, "Oh." I said, "Ancients won't sell." And that sounds really stupid now, and it was probably stupid then, honestly, but it was true then. The Ancients games of that time were like two lines that smashed together, and it was boring, and I'm saying that as a player. I just was bored by Ancients games, and I didn't think I could sell a lot of them. And so Richard said, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way," and he hung up. And I mean, he's very nice, but he hung up. And so I thought, well, we got a Civil War game. That's great from Richard Berg. About 30 minutes later, my phone rings, and I pick it up. And I still remember the conversation to this day because we've become best friends over the years. "Gene, you don't know me, but this is Mark Herman." And I was like, "Hi, Mark Herman." And he was like, "Do yourself a favor and take this Alexander game. Do yourself a favor." And there aren't many people that could have said that to me that I would have just done it. But there
Yeah.
was something about the certainty in his voice and also that, hey, he was Mark Herman and, victory games for me. And so I was like, Okay, I'll take it. And and that began, not only a long uh, co-worker fellowship. Mark still creating games. Just won a Charlie the other day for Rebel Fury. Another one of those guys that started with us in 91, and in 2025, he's still here. And I would say at the top of his game. So he and Richard came, and most people have forgotten 1863, which was the Civil War game that Richard brought, but not so much the Great Battles of Alexander, the first game on our list from 1991, because it brought us Richard Berg and Mark Herman. And that was the dream team of the 90s for us. And a lot of stuff outside this interview happened after that. And Richard became like less connected because of some tragedies in his life. And, but Mark and I stayed friends with Richard until the end.
Yeah.
And he still did games for us. And I treasured the friendships way more than even the working relationships that built GMT. So we don't have time for all the origin stories that I could tell about Richard and Mark and I at Origins. But the thing about these guys, it will tell you everything you need to know about them. I used to have to work Origins by myself.
Oh, wow.
Wherever Origins was, I mean, we didn't have a lot of money,
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of people. Roger never traveled; he always stayed home. So I went to, well, he went to one, I think, but I usually went to Origins and ran a booth for 4 or 5 days by myself, and it was exhausting. Many times missing meals, or having somebody bring me something real quick to the booth, and not it's not a wine fest, but it wasn't very fun. And so after I'd done this for a year, getting ready to go to Origins, and Richard calls me and said, "Hey, Mark and I are coming to Origins." And I said, "Great." And he said, "We'd like to help you in the booth." And
Wow.
so nobody asked them. They didn't have to. They just showed up. And I'll tell you what, Richard Berg was amazing in a booth because he had the gift of gab. He also loved gamers and loved games and could talk in an erudite way about opera and history and every aspect that you could ever want to know that related to history or games. And he was just gregarious. And Mark and I would sit there and look over him and just shake our head. And he would walk the guy over, and the guy would have a stack of games after talking to Richard for 30 minutes. And we would sell a bunch of games. And what they asked me to do was every night I took them to dinner. So that's what they got paid for all those, you know, over the years, hundreds of hours that they spent at the GMT booth helping me, is they got dinner. And
Wow.
even that ended up being a great deal for me because Richard knew all the best places to eat. And so as he told me, his job was to give me some culture. So so we would go out to these great places to eat, and I learned about food I'd never had before, and just as you might imagine, our friendship just really built. Um, wh- I'll tell you one story because we were at Origins one year. We'd finished dinner. We come back to the exhibit hall. We're walking to the exhibit hall, and Mark, of course, while at Victory, had done the design for Peloponnesian War. And, that was the gold standard at the time. And so we walk in, and there's a guy that's got a booth and a big demo space, and it's got a Peloponnesian War game. And so we walk over toward it, and Richard and I kind of stood back and just kind of watched, but Mark decides he's going to engage the guy. So Mark walks up and starts asking questions about the guy's Peloponnesian War game. And the guy is like passive aggressive about Mark's game. He doesn't know who he's talking to, right? And he starts trashing Mark's Peloponnesian War. And pretty soon he says, and the designers, blah, 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 too. He starts talking down Mark. And Mark said, "Oh, yeah, I know him. That guy's a real a-hole." And Richard and I were just like, we were dying laughing. These are the kind of moments and experiences that built our friendship. over the years at at Origins and at other shows we went to. Friendships are built by quality time spent in decent quantities together. And so I consider that game Great Battles of Alexander. Of course, it spawned SPQR, which is, I think, been a better seller for us even than Great Battles of Alexander. But what it really brought was two top of the line game designers who loved to work together, who were best friends, into the GMT family. And I ended up with two of the best friends of my life out of the deal. So I'm always going to put that one at the top.
Nice.
So I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to do this chronologically, okay?
Yep.
But I'm going to fast forward 8 years for number two. Now, in the meantime, we did SPQR in 1995. We did a bunch of other really good games, but there was nothing that really elevated us in or differentiated us from other companies. In 1999, Ted Racer came to us, and Ted was known for doing a bunch of games at Command Magazine with XTR. He was the World War I guy, right? And still is, but he's a lot more than that. I would point out that Ted just won two Charles Roberts Awards for I, Napoleon for
Yeah.
last year for best Napoleonic game and I think best solitaire game, right? So Ted's not a one-trick pony. But when he came to us in 1999, he said, I have a card-driven game. And up to that point, card-driven games were mostly from Mark Herman, although I think he did one with Mark Simonich in between. Um, and he said, it's on World War One. It's a strategic game. And I said, well, did you use Mark's system? And he said, well, sort of. I wasn't sure that was a bonus, that it was sort of. But I looked at it, Andy Lewis and I both looked at it, and we really liked it. In fact, the original Paths of Glory has a few pages in it of a sample game that Andy and I played. And then Ted went in and commented about how bad our play was, which, he gave us grief about for a long time. But Ted brought us Paths of Glory, and this was the game. And this has happened to me lots of times over 35 years. You know, when SPI stopped and Avalon Hill was bought and essentially stopped, that left a mark with a lot of us wargamers. I mean, it hurt. And so I think we're like more looking for a problem when a company's in trouble or like, might go out of business. We're like, oh no, not again, because that hurt. It was the source of a lot of our joy. And those two companies just were gone one day. And so I've always had gamers. And the other thing is, I kind of left Avalon Hill when they started doing Schmuck on a Camel instead of, the next war game that I wanted. And so as soon as I announced that we're going to do Paths of Glory, all these Hex Encounter wargamers start writing me or saying online, "You're leaving us. You're leaving us. What are you doing? You're leaving us." And so that's the refrain that I've heard again and again and again over the years when we would try to broaden and do a different kind of game. And I would say, "No, no, no. We still got plenty of Hex Encounter games." And to this day, that's still true, right? But we have tried to do some other kind of games. And Paths of Glory was really the first one. I mean, you might say Hornet Leader long, long before that, but probably Paths of Glory. And it's the one we took the most garbage for online. But once people actually played it and they saw that, oh, this is a for real war game, and it's actually made by a war gamer who likes Hex Encounter games, then I think they cut us some slack until the next one of those that we did, when they would yell at us again. But that game now is sold through 5 print runs. I think it's our number 5 all-time best-selling game. It took the card-driven game. Mark did what's now Washington's War in originally We the People in a certain format, and later did For the People in a certain format. Paths of Glory takes card-driven games in a completely different direction. And I think it helped people see, gamers see, the potential for card-driven games. And now we've done 15 plus card-driven games on all kinds of different topics with all kinds of different systems. A few other companies have done a few games here and there with the card-driven system. It is a robust system that you can use in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
But it took people like Ted Racer, people who weren't Mark Herman in the beginning, to take the system in a different way or in a different direction and show us um, how robust it could be
Hmm.
and what a fun experience it could create. I still love Ted's second game of that series, which was on World War II. And wargamers didn't like it as much as they liked Paths of Glory. I think we only sold it out twice or something, but it was a really good game. Took the system a little bit further with breakthroughs and exploitations and things like that. So so Ted, I mean, Paths of Glory brought us Ted Racer. Okay, so that's how it built us with people and designers, but it also brought us CDGs.
Hmm.
And remember, Mark hadn't done a CDG for GMT yet at that point. Yet is the big word because he was going to do some really important ones. So, so Paths of Glory for me is always going to be a really, really important game. Without that, maybe we don't do For the People or certainly Twilight Struggle, another CDG that took it in a whole different direction. I think Paths of Glory was the beginning of that. So we've talked about Mark Herman, we've talked about Richard Berg, we've talked about Ted Racer. Let's talk about Reiner Knizia for a minute. Reiner was huge before there ever was a GMT. He's probably sold more games by himself than we've ever sold in the aggregate among 500 games. Reiner is a true, shining star in the broader game industry. Certainly a bigger star than GMT ever was. And I got lucky. I met him at Spiel in Essen, and we kind of hit it off. I really liked him. I thought he was a nice guy. And and he said, I'm coming to the States. Maybe we can. He asked me if I was going to go to Las Vegas. There was a show there, and I said no, because I had no money to go to shows. It was like go to as few as possible. And so a couple months later, I get a call from Reiner, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be going to Las Vegas next week, and I have a day layover in San Francisco, which is about 4 hours from where I live." Okay, so he said, if you could spare the day, he said you could come up and I could show you some of the designs. He goes, I take about 20 of my prototypes to a show like this to show different companies. And he said, if you want to get a look at some of them, and if you like some of them, we can do them for GMT. So my daughters at the time were about 9 and 7. I took them out of school and we did a San Francisco day trip. We went way early in the morning and got up to Reiner's hotel and went and sat. He had a big suite hotel room, and went and sat in the suite side of his hotel room with games everywhere. And he would bring them over and say, "Well, here's this one." And if GMT wanted to do it, and he had a game called Attacka, which basically became Battle Line. And and that's the third game that built GMT, by the way, was Battle Line. It's our second best-selling game. We've sold, scores of thousands of copies. And it brought us Reiner. And he's really good at that kind of game. An introductory game that doesn't feel like an introductory game. There's still like, you still have to really think to win, but somebody playing it for the first time can win, right? And so we looked at that. We saw, and basically what we did to those games, I took 4 games that day. And I would show and he showed them to my daughters too. That they were by that time 9 and 7. They were playing a lot of games in our home. And so I'd look at them and say, "What do you think?" And so Battle Line, they're like, "Eh," but I liked it, so we took that. But there was this game that became Ivanhoe, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was called. There were these were like German versions of or mock-ups that he had. But it turned into Ivanhoe for us. And what we did with both of those games is we added like action cards to them. Some, they were all numbers. Reiner did stuff with math and numbers a lot. And so we added some cards that were event cards, essentially, that we thought made the games a little more unpredictable and fun. And I say we, Reiner did that work, but we asked him to do it because we would not deign to, fix or upgrade a Reiner design at all. So that day in the hotel room in San Francisco, we picked four games, and uh, one of them became our second all-time bestseller, Battle Line. One of them that we've since given the rights back to Reiner because we couldn't sell enough of them really. But it's still the game that for 25 years our family has taken on vacation every time we go. Ivanhoe, definitely our favorite family game. It, came out of that. And so who would think, one day in Reiner's hotel room, looking at games for 4 or 5 hours. It was really fun. The girls, they're well grown now, and they still talk about how fun that was as little kids to get to ditch school and go hang out with a world-class game designer for a day and just look at all his games. I was going to try to move heaven and earth to get that done, to go see him. And I haven't seen Reiner in a really long time. Um, but and we don't do as many of his games anymore. Clearly, we do Battle Line, and then a few years ago, we had an artist come to us who wanted to do a medieval Battle Line, who had done some really nice art, and so Reiner approved that, and so we've got Battle Line Medieval in the line as well. But those are the only two games of his that we have now. I would love to get the license back for Ivanhoe someday,
Yeah.
and I kind of hope that one of these days Reiner and I run into each other again, and I can sit down and say, "Hey, you got anything that might fit us?" Because I still think he's a really good guy,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed getting to know him. I enjoyed spending time with him in Germany a couple different years, and certainly that day in San Francisco. And I think what we brought out of that is scores of thousands of players have gotten a game that has brought them a lot of enjoyment that they could teach their kids, that they could teach people that don't know about strategy games and get them playing right away. Let's move along now. Again, a lot of games happened between 2000 and 2005, but in 2005, we put Twilight Struggle, we produced it. We had seen it way back in 2001 at WBC, and that was right after I had hired Andy Lewis to basically be the gatekeeper. He and I did a lot of that before then. I said, Andy, this is going to be your official job now. You're going to choose the games. And he said, really? I said, yeah, I'm going to stay out of it. You're going to choose the games. So we're at WBC, and he comes over and he says, hey, I want you to see this game. He goes, I'm going to turn it down, but I just want you to see it. So I'm not sure really what was in his head, but I went over there and I met these two guys, Jason and Ananda, that I had never met before. And I asked Ananda, who was down showing it, to just show me a little bit of it. And pretty soon I looked up at Andy after about 5, 10 minutes, and I looked up at him and I said, "Take it." And he goes, "But I thought you said that I was going to get to." I said, "Take it." And he goes, "Why?" I said, "This game is my childhood." And that's how that game hit me, is that we all talk about anybody who lived through it talks about the days where you got under your desks, to hide from nuclear war and all that, the stuff that would not have done any good, right? But there was a paranoia about that and an awareness about that especially in the 60s and in the 70s, while the Cold War was pretty warm. And that game, I felt like even in just a few minutes, I could look at it and I'd see this immerses you in that. These guys have done a really good job at that. And I had no idea really how well they had done at the time. And I don't think they knew at the time that it would get the sort of response that it's engendered in the gaming world. And so we put it on our P500 list, and it did really lousy. And there were people in the company going, Gene, what is wrong with you? You should have just let Andy turn this down. And but I kept thinking, yeah, but as my child, there's something there, you know? So we stuck with it. We stuck with it. I still remember Tony calling me one time and saying, hey, I think maybe we should let this thing go. And I'm like, we can't. We got to figure a way to get this out. So it took a long time to get through P500, which sounds crazy now, right?
Yeah.
But when we finally decided to print it, not too long after that, this is when Andy Lewis redeemed himself. I mean, he's not the villain of the story. I really am because I told him he could do it and then I immediately overrode it. But the game is out and Andy was friends with Alan Moon. And Andy was one of those few elite people that got invited to Alan Moon's gathering of friends every year.
Wow.
So Andy goes to the gathering of friends and he takes a copy of Twilight Struggle, which is just out. And wasn't it'd been out for a few months, wasn't selling very well. And so he takes it, and that's the last I heard until Monday morning. Andy sends me an email and says, I showed this game to Alan Moon. He played it all weekend, and he told me before I left that it's the best game he's ever played. And I'm typing back to Andy, can you ask him if we can use that in marketing, right? Before I had heard back from Andy, I went on Board Game Geek, and there Alan had put on Board Game Geek, I played this game all weekend, and it's the best game I ever played. And pretty soon we had sold out the first print run. So, if Alan Moon is anywhere in the world watching this, he should know that if he and I are in the same town, he's never going to have to buy food or drink. Okay, because he was the beginning of really this big interest in and push for Twilight Struggle. And after that, it seemed like we just sold out print run after print run after print run. And I think we're on our 12th print run now overall, or 11th, counting the deluxe versions. And some of those print runs were for us huge. For us, a big print run is, seven or eight or 10,000. And we printed 20,000 of several of those print runs and sold them out, quickly. And a lot of that was Alan Moon. He's a big deal. Even
He's had a
even
bit of success, just Ticket to
he,
Ride and
he's a big deal.
yeah.
So that mattered to us. It mattered a lot. And so, like I said, if Alan's looking at this, I hope he knows how much we appreciate that because he didn't have to do that. And you can tell a lot about people when they do things that are kind and good, and they don't have to. So, of course, that game brought us Jason Matthews and Ananda Gupta as a design team, and they have blessed GMT since then, both individually and together. With now we've got these what I call the children of Twilight Struggle games. Twilight Struggle Red Sea, and now we got the one in South Asian Monsoon, and Ananda's working on another one in that series. And then, of course, it spawned Imperial Struggle, which on its own was, I think, our 14th all-time best-selling game. So, I mean, that's not nothing. Uh,
No.
to make the top 15 for our games, that's a lot of sales. But there again, the friendships. I'm getting to work with Ananda on a pretty much daily basis right now on the digital version of Mr. President. And it's just so fun to work with somebody that you totally trust. And you don't have to worry about whether they're stabbing you in the back or, any of that. And you know that they're totally professional. They know what they're doing and they're going to do what they say. And so that experience with Ananda has been great. Jason has been nothing but professional with us, except when I met you when we were in DC back, what was that, the end of March? Jason comes over to my wife and to me and says, hey, and Rachel, our daughter, was there and said, hey, would you guys like to be my guest at Forge Theater for a musical on Thursday night? We said, oh, that'd be awesome. So we went to the theater to Forge Theater with Jason, and I get there, and he hands me a Lincoln top hat. He goes, "You have to wear this. It's the only condition. You have to wear this." And so Of course, the next day he was putting pictures of my wife and daughter online saying, "Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln or Mrs. Billingsley, how did you like the play?" And so, Jason lives in a really difficult. He's in the middle of the political world. And I'm like sorry for anybody that has to live in the middle of that world. He's good at it, and he's a person I know in that world who is kind and considerate. He has a point of view, but he's also like one of the most interesting guys to talk to and with. And he's not one of these people that will try to cram all their views down your throat. You can have thoughtful conversations about real issues. And we've had some of those at various shows around the states. So I'm there again. The game certainly built GMT and brought us to markets that we had never been to before, made tens of thousands of people aware of GMT who had not been before, and helped us sell, I don't know, three or 400,000 copies of a digital game. So yeah, it's been, you know, of all of our games, it's sold three times as many as any other game, and more than that when you count digital, and just broadened us in ways that no other game has. And it's funny because it's still, well, I don't know if it is or not, because I don't know which side to take in this argument. It is or it isn't a war game. I don't really care as long as people keep buying it. You probably know we're doing a 20th anniversary edition of it that hopefully will be out later this year. Um, those guys, they created a real gem, and they're still doing it, with more games. And the things they put in this 20th anniversary edition, I didn't see coming. They're pretty cool. And I'm
Oh,
not going to spoil some of the surprise. Um, but Jason's got a new scenario in there, and I think people will have a good time with it. Anyway,
amazing.
I mean, definitely you make a case that was probably the biggest game that built GMT Games, and that was in 2005. But also in 2005, a game came out that appealed to kind of a whole different group. And that game was called Commands and Colors Ancients. And this game brought us Richard Borg. Now, I have to tell you that Tony and Andy and I had been talking to Richard Borg at Avalon Con and then WBC. Avalon Con became WBC for probably 10 years. In fact, somewhere around here, I have a couple of prototypes of a game called Stone Age and something else from Richard that just, never really went anywhere. We were just constantly looking for the right fit. And I always loved Battle Cry and wished that we had done it, honestly. And so um, he looked at our GBOH series, which, we didn't really talk about that too much with Great Battles of Alexander and SBQR, but it spawned this, 15 game plus series. If you look at how many companies have actually done a series that lasted 15 games, there's not a whole lot of them. This was a huge series for us. And Richard said, you know what? I think this system would work great for Ancients, and I'd like to work on one if you guys are interested. And we were like, you had us at, I'd like to work on this. And because we already liked Richard, he's a really gregarious guy. He's one of my favorite people in the hobby. And he lives in Florida. I live in California, and we don't get to see each other enough. But he's one of the not only um, brilliant designers, but just a guy you'd love to sit down and have dinner with and just talk about games. The last time I saw him, I was at Gen Con a couple of years ago, and here's these long tables of a Star Wars game he had put out for another company, and he's running the whole event. He's running back and forth between all these tables, teaching people and helping people and answering questions. And he was just in his element. And before I even went over and said hi to him, I just stood there and watched for a little while and kind of marveled at that, the joy that he got from doing that and the joy that he gave to all those people that were playing in that series. I love that. I love people to feel that way about our games and our designers and our designs. And so Richard Borg was a super great fit with GMT. And he took the commands and color system, I think, to a new level with Ancients because he took things, he looked at the Great Battle series kind of as his model. And so you see there's a lot more in Ancients that he took into consideration in terms of unit types and the kind of hits that you can do and all that. And I think made the Commands and Color series really feel like Ancients. And so our GBH guys basically ate that up. And then it broadened GMT even more because the people who played Battle Cry and the people who played the World War II game that I always forget the name of, Memoir 44, the same series, they said, "Oh, he's got another one." And we don't know who GMT is, but it's Richard Borg, so we'll give it a shot. And it kind of built GMT through just Richard's popularity of his system. And then, of course, it spawned what six expansions, and these are boxed expansions, so this is not a little thing. And then it
Wow.
spawned in 2010 uh, Commands and Colors Napoleonics, which also had six and soon seven expansions boxed. And we've sold, I don't know, those are what is Commands Colors Ancients? It's our fifth or sixth best-selling game. No, it's our
It
number
says
four best-selling game. And Napoleonics is our number eight best-selling game. And we've got a couple more now on the line. The medieval, we've got two games in that line, and then we've got the samurai battles. And if Richard wants to do more, actually, we do have plans. And so, we'll see. It's
yeah.
always, if you're still up for it, then as long as he's having fun, so are we. So Tony Curtis kind of works with him on those. So I don't always know what they've got cooked up. But those are some of the games that when Tony or Richard call me and say, "Hey, I've got a game that's ready for P500." I usually I don't ask. It's not a yes or no thing. It's okay. The answer is yes. Can you send us the materials? That's it. So that all started with Commands and Colors Ancients, and that's game number five.